Magic the Gathering is a collectible card game that is fun, complex, yet easy to play. The game requires and develops critical thinking, combinatorial mathematics, creativity, and imagination, and all while part of a socially interactive experience with others. This video will teach you everything you need to know to play in a matter of minutes, from rules and mechanics to what to expect over the course of a turn. Magic the Gathering is one of my favorite games. In fact, I'd say it's my absolute favorite game, and I'd love to share it with you. The game's basic premise is fairly straightforward. Using a 60-card deck, draw 7 cards, play 1 land per turn, cast spells using mana from those lands, attack your opponent with your creatures, or use them to block your opponents as they try and attack you with theirs. While that might seem simple, there are currently more than 20,000 unique Magic cards, to which hundreds are added each year, all of which ensures no two games will ever truly be the same. Magic is a TCG, a trading card game, and trading cards with friends is one of the more fun ways to build your collection. Many Magic the Gathering players start with some booster packs or starter decks, or even a deck builder's toolkit, and slowly build their decks from there. In order to play a game of Magic, you'll need a 60-card deck. At its most basic level, a deck is made up of lands and spells. Spells are what you cast to play the game, and lands are the resources you draw power from to cast your spells. The basic template is that you play 24 lands in a 60-card deck. Of course, this number can vary depending on how the deck is constructed, but generally speaking, 24 lands should be fine. The spells you include in a Magic deck are all of the cards that have a mana cost. These can be creatures, artifacts, enchantments, instants, sorceries, and even the iconic planeswalkers that you may recognize from Magic's story. Creatures are the bread and butter of your decks. They'll be fighting and can have synergistic abilities. Artifacts and enchantments augment your board's state and can offer bonuses and buffs to the cards you have in play. Instants and sorceries are powerful one-time effects like destroying creatures or drawing cards. As you can see in the corner of a card, mana costs tell you how much mana you need to pay for the card. The different colors of mana in Magic represent the power you can draw from the 5 different basic land types. Plains generate white mana, islands blue, swamps black, mountains red, and finally forests produce green mana. Naturally, if you build a deck with red and white cards, you'll need lands that can produce red and white mana, so plenty of plains and mountains. As you explore new cards, you may discover lands that can generate more than one color of mana, which are very useful when building a deck with more than one color of spell in it. The mana cost of a spell will generally have either a generic cost, represented by a number in a gray circle, a colored mana cost, represented by a colored symbol, or, more commonly, a mixture of the two. This shock costs 1 red mana to cast. We can pay for it by tapping a mountain to generate 1 red mana. This short sword is 1 generic mana to cast. This means we can tap and pay for this with any color of mana, whether that be a red mana from a mountain or even a green mana from a forest. Falcon or Adept costs 3 generic and 1 white mana. This means that at the very least you have to pay 1 white mana in order to play the spell. The rest of the mana can be any kind you like, so we can pay 3 red and 1 white, or even just 4 white if we wanted to. The important thing to remember here is that you must pay the color requirements, even if the generic requirements are flexible. To generate mana from a land, we tap it. Tapping indicates we have used the resource for the turn, and is a handy way to remind both players that the resource has been used. Don't worry, when you start your next turn, you'll be able to untap and use them again. Each player starts with 20 life points. Your goal is to reduce the life total of your opponent to 0 before they can do the same to you. Turns consist of playing 1 land a turn to increase your resources, playing increasingly powerful spells, and sending creatures into combat when you feel like you have a strong attack to make. The easiest way to whittle the life points of an opponent down is through creature combat. A creature card has a mana cost, a type line, which tells us what it is, in this case a dog, rules text, which is any text in the main text box of the card, and unlike the other spells you cast, has 2 numbers in the corner. These are the power and toughness of the creature. Alpine Watchdog has 2 power, so when it attacks, it will deal 2 damage. It's not quite as simple as that, though. Your opponent will have plenty of hurdles for you to overcome in order to get to their precious life total. One thing the opponent can do is block. Alpine Watchdog has 2 toughness, so when it either blocks or becomes blocked, it can withstand a creature with 1 power, but will fall to a creature with 2 power or higher. While other TCGs you may have played might be different, in Magic, attacks are declared straight at the opponent. If we attack with our Alpine Watchdog, our opponent has the opportunity to block. They may block with their Liliana's Steward, a 1/2 zombie. In this case, the zombie will be dealt 2 damage and will go to the graveyard, but our Alpine Watchdog will take 1 damage and survive the combat. If, though, our opponent decides to block with their Walking Corpse, then the creatures will be evenly matched. Both creatures will end up in the graveyard. There are different ways to buff your creatures by using different spells, and also ways to nerf an opponent's creatures or even remove them entirely. This is required in order to get past the stronger creatures your opponent might play. Sitting across from a Colossal Dreadmaw, our Alpine Watchdog won't quite do it. The next important thing to learn is the difference between cards that stay in play when you play them and cards that resolve their effect and then go to the graveyard. The play area in which you play is commonly referred to as your board. Your board consists of the battlefield, where you'll keep any cards that are in play, your library or deck, and your graveyard, which is where cards go when they leave play. There's also the exile zone, which is super out of play, but that's used less commonly. Each land you play stays in play unless an effect declares otherwise. The same is true for creatures who stick around to fight, artifacts and enchantments, and planeswalkers. These are effects that are permanently in play until removed by your opponent. As such, we call them permanents. That leaves 2 other categories of spell: instants and sorceries. These spells represent the impressive feats and arcane magics you might employ to help you achieve victory. And once their effect is resolved, they are discarded into the graveyard. Thankfully, it's fairly straightforward to remember which spells are permanents and which are not. The clue is in the name. An enchantment is a lingering effect, while an instant is, well, gone in an instant. So you've got a deck of 60 cards, you've got your 24 lands, and an assortment of 36 spells of varying cost. You have your goal: get the opponent to 0 life points. How do we play? To start the game, each player sets their life total to 20, which you can track with a spin down d20 or pen and paper. Decide who goes first using randomization. The most popular way to do this is to roll 2 6-sided dice each. Each player draws 7 cards, and then the player who is going first proceeds with their turn. Turns are broken up into phases, and at a high level, these phases are the beginning phase, the main phase, the combat phase, the second main phase, and the end phase. These phases can be further broken down into steps, which we will cover as we continue. The beginning phase includes the untap step. This is where you untap all of your permanents, including lands and creatures. The upkeep step, a time where many abilities will trigger. The draw step. Each turn, players add a card from the top of their deck to their hand. The only time you will not draw in your draw step is if you are playing first. On every subsequent turn, players draw a card in the draw step. Your main phase is for casting spells and playing lands in order to fuel your spells. You may play 1 land per turn unless a card specifies otherwise. You can cast as many spells as you like, provided you can pay the mana cost. Once you've tapped all of your land, that's it. You'll have to wait until next turn to cast more spells. The next phase is the combat phase. This is the time where you can play out your attacks. There's one thing to be aware of when it comes to creature combat, though. If you cast a creature spell, this particular creature is unable to participate in the current bout. The combat phase can be further split into steps. Firstly, we move from main phase 1 to the combat phase. Any triggers that say at the beginning of combat will trigger here. Once both players are satisfied, we move to declare attackers. During the declare attackers step, you may declare any creature that can attack as an attacker. This includes all creatures you were in control of from the start of your turn. To do this, tap the creature in the same way you would tap a land. This signifies it has been declared as an attacker. Once you have declared your attackers, the opponent will be able to declare their blockers in the declare blockers step. Only creatures that are untapped may block. So if they attacked last turn, they can't block now. They may block however they wish. Next is the combat damage step. Damage is calculated here. Creatures deal damage to each other with their power, and their toughness statistic determines if they succumb to this damage. Any creatures who receive lethal damage are sent to the graveyard, whether they attacked or blocked. Any creatures that weren't blocked will deal damage to the opponent. Hurrah! Take that, opponent! After the damage step, there is the end of combat step. Some abilities and effects will trigger here. After this step, we proceed to the second main phase. The second main phase is essentially the same as the first main phase. If you haven't yet played a land for turn, you may also play a land. After this second main phase, we go to the end phase. First of all is the end step. Here, any effects or abilities that last until the end step or trigger in the end step happen. After this is the cleanup. Here, the player whose turn it is discards down to 7 cards again if they have 8 or more cards in their hand. We remove any damage from our creatures, and any effects that say until end of turn will end. Damage remains on our creatures until the cleanup phase. If our opponent's 3 toughness creature took 1 damage during combat, we would have a chance to do the remaining 2 damage with a burn spell in our second main phase. Or we could do that damage in the end step if that spell is an instant. I'll cover when you can cast instants later in the video, but what's important here is that your creatures do not permanently lose hit points or the like. Their toughness is refreshed during the cleanup step. After this, the turn passes to your opponent, who will take the same steps and phases as you, except this time you'll have the opportunity to block. Play continues until one player's life total is reduced to 0. This is easiest to achieve through attacking with creatures, but can be done with other spells. Burn spells in red are popular for this, and many can deal damage directly to the player. There's one other way in which a player can lose the game. If they run out of cards and cannot draw a card either during their draw step or when a spell or ability asks them to draw a card, they lose the game. At this point, you know enough to play a game of Magic without too much trouble. The trickiest part about learning the basics of Magic, though, is priority and the stack. The stack is an elegant solution to the idea that players may respond to spells and abilities with their own spells and abilities. Unlike some other card games, an opponent may make a play during your turn, and vice versa. In order to understand exactly when you can make a play, you need to use the knowledge you've gained so far. First off, when you cast a spell, it will go on the stack. The stack is an imaginary pile of cards that a card will enter before it resolves. This is where counter magic comes in. If you're playing blue, this is where you can counter a spell. When a spell is on the stack, players may respond by casting any spell that is either an instant or has the keyword flash. This will place their spell on top of the stack. Players may respond in turn, passing priority between each other to see if they want to cast more spells to add to the stack. Once priority has been passed to the opponent, and they do not declare a new spell, they will return priority to you, and the first spell on the stack will resolve. Spells on the stack will resolve in reverse order. So if we're in the combat phase and an opponent targets my Alpine Watchdog with a shock in order to deal 2 damage, I might get scared and decide, hey, I'd rather you didn't remove my dog. In this case, while the shock is on the stack targeting the Alpine Watchdog, I can cast another spell in order to protect them. So I can cast Invigorating Surge for 2 and a green to put a +1/+1 counter on my dog, and then double the counters, making them a 4/4. The dog then survives the 2 damage as the stack resolves with the last spell cast as the first resolve. I couldn't, however, cast Basri's Solidarity to put a +1/+1 counter on each of my creatures. This spell is a sorcery and can only be cast at sorcery speed during my main phase. Going back to our example, if an opponent wanted to fire off another shock in response to my Invigorating Surge, that spell would resolve first. My Alpine Watchdog would die, and the remaining spells in the stack would attempt to resolve. If they have no effect now that the creature is gone, they simply fizzle, meaning they have no effect and are discarded. As you learn to play Magic, you'll learn a lot of Magic is played at instant speed, and at the last possible moment. This is one of the most enjoyable parts of the game, and can provide fun and intriguing gameplay as players bluff and try to one-up each other. So when can you cast an instant? Well, whenever priority is passed to you. And when is priority passed to you? Well, priority is passed whenever a player wants to move to another step or phase, or when they add a spell or ability to the stack. While it's pretty straightforward to understand what creatures and other permanents like artifacts and enchantments do, Planeswalkers are a rarer permanent and one that has special rules. Planeswalkers are the heroes of the multiverse, and they have abilities which can be activated once per turn during your main phase, anytime you'd cast a spell that isn't an instant. These are powerful effects, and the cost to use them is modifying the starting loyalty points that the Planeswalker entered the battlefield with. Liliana, Waker of the Dead, comes into play with 4 loyalty. Her +1 will add a point, and if you wish to use her -3 ability, you will subtract 3 loyalty points. You may only subtract the loyalty points they have. You may not activate the -3 if they only have 2 loyalty, for instance. When a Planeswalker has 0 points, they leave the battlefield and go to the graveyard. In this instance, their debt to you is paid and they owe you nothing else. There is one other way to remove loyalty points, though. A repeatable ability every turn is powerful. And so when you declare your attackers, you may declare your attackers at the Planeswalker instead of the player. Attacks and blocks happen as normal, and if the creature does get through and deal damage, the Planeswalker loses loyalty in the same way the opponent would lose life. It's as simple as that. You're now armed with enough knowledge to play a game of Magic. There are countless rules and abilities on creatures, though, and learning them all can take time. It's important to get a grasp on them, though, because they'll be how you win your games. Here's some of the most common ones you'll see. Haste. Creatures with haste can be played during your main phase and then immediately declared as attacker during combat. They do not have summoning sickness. Flying. Creatures with flying can only be blocked by creatures with flying or reach. Reach. Creatures with reach can block flying creatures. Death Touch. A creature with Death Touch will always deal lethal damage to an opposing creature by dealing only 1 damage, even if that creature's toughness is high enough to otherwise survive. First Strike. A creature with First Strike will deal its damage in an additional combat damage step that happens before combat damage. A 2/2 creature with First Strike then would deal lethal damage to another 2/2 creature without, and this creature would die from lethal damage before it can deal damage back. Trample. A creature with Trample can trample over blocking creatures. A Colossal Dreadmaw with 6 power can deal the remaining damage past lethal damage directly to the opponent. In this case, if they block with a 3/4 creature, the remaining 2 damage can be dealt past the blocking creature straight to the opponent as though the creature weren't blocked. Menace. A creature with Menace can only be blocked by 2 or more creatures, and never be blocked by only 1. Vigilance. A creature with Vigilance does not need to be tapped in order to be declared attacking. This means, if it survives, it will be able to block during your opponent's turn. Lifelink. A creature with Lifelink will gain you life equal to the damage it deals. Indestructible. A creature that is indestructible can never receive lethal damage, not even from Death Touch creatures. Any effects that destroy a creature will not work. Hexproof. A creature with Hexproof cannot be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. Creatures can do so much more, and as you expand your knowledge and collection, you'll come across creatures that can destroy other creatures when they come into play. Creatures that can untap your lands, and even creatures that can grow and get bigger as the game progresses. I hope very much this video has been of some help to you. Where do you start? What do you buy? What's your first event going to look like? I have videos on all of these topics and more. What products to protect your precious cards are also available. Check out the links here and in this video's description to continue your Magic the Gathering journey. And, hit subscribe.